Hi, my name is Angela. I'm currently a third-year pharmacy student in pharmacy school, and today I'm going to talk about my experience as a first-year student or a P1 student. I'm going to talk about the classes I took, kind of the different areas that I explored as far as work and organizations, and I'm also just going to talk about my general experience. So if you're interested in that, then just keep watching. I'm going to talk now, I have a cheat sheet I'm going to use, but I'm going to talk about my fall semester classes. I had 16 credit hours total, and I'm going to kind of break down what I learned in each class a little bit. So we had a medicinal biochemistry class. It was just MedBio 1, and I had general biochemistry as a prerequisite course in my undergrad, and I really recommend that people do that to make medicinal biochemistry easier. Me and a couple other students definitely noticed that med biochem was easier compared to others who didn't take general biochemistry. So that was really nice, but it's specifically biochemistry in regards to medications and the specifics that come with that. We did cover amino acids and all the different structures and stuff, so that was fun, but also it was really nice to focus on medications within that field. Then we had a pharmacology course, and that was my favorite course and continued to be my favorite course for the rest of pharmacy school, even though I don't have any pharmacology courses to take any longer. But basically it's the nitty-gritty of like drugs and how they work in our systems in our body and all the complex systems in our body. And I just really enjoyed that because it's such a level of detail that I love about pharmacy, but yet I will never really have to get into that much detail unless I were to go into some kind of like research or something like that that's specific to drug structure and mechanisms within our body. So I just love that I could, soak up all that detail, learn it, and maybe use it a little bit in the future, but really never have to remember that much detail again. So that's why I liked pharmacology, but we had our first course with that. We had a calculations course, and basically what that entailed was learning the different types of calculations that you'll have to do in pharmacy. Math is involved, unfortunately. I don't like math, but math is involved, and so this kind of went into probably a little bit more compounding calculations, aliquots, dilutions. We kind of had to know just general proportions, and so that was just a math kind of course that we took. It wasn't too fun, but we also had a clinical chemistry course, and that's where we learned kind of how chemistry would fit into the clinical or healthcare setting. So we covered labs, we covered how the different labs work as far as measurement and actually obtaining a lab value. We talked about which areas of health or which disease states lab values pertain to. We also learned, I remember, about pregnancy tests and how they worked. So the ELISA immunoassay, mechanism in order to detect pregnancy, and just how that applies to other things as well, because it did come up in later courses. So it's a nice general introduction into clinical chemistry and a lot of over-the-counter clinical testing, like drug tests and how those things work. And then we had a class on ethics and legal things, so like state federal laws that pertain to pharmacy and healthcare in general. I had work experience a little bit before coming into pharmacy school, and a lot of people did in pharmacy school, so this kind of was easier for some people than it was for others who hadn't had work experience, but it's just a base knowledge of law, and we have law coming up in my next semester, so I'll get involved more with law and the specifics, but it also dealt with just ethics and cultural issues that you're going to have to deal with in patient care as a pharmacist. So that was a good class, I enjoyed that. We had a class on pharmacy, just like the history, kind of what we're all about. It was kind of more one of our easier courses to kind of give us a break, but it was nice because a lot of the things you don't realize about where you've come from in the field that you're in, kind of all they've had to go through, and it kind of helps set you up for the future, knowing kind of how you've evolved as a profession. So it was a nice course, and we had another course that was a lab. It was our only wet lab. We have a skills lab each semester that teaches us pharmacy-specific skills, how to use them, and assesses us on them so that we make sure that we're learning what we're supposed to be learning and that we can actually advance in the curriculum appropriately, that we're not just skipping by without really knowing what pharmacists can do and doing those things and practicing them. But the wet lab, it was called a translational lab. And so from what I can understand, translational research is when we take results from like the general skills, general basic chemistry lab kind of work, and we apply them to clinical settings and to patient care. So it was kind of that bridge. They wanted to kind of show us how you can take information from basics of science and chemistry and then apply them to clinical skills that a pharmacist would use. So I didn't really enjoy that one too much, but it was useful, and it was just the only time we had to really be in a lab doing experiments, kind of like you would do in general chemistry or organic chemistry. So we had all morning classes in that semester. We maybe had a couple afternoons, and then depending on when you had your skills lab, you'd have some afternoon classes. But other than that, it was nice and from like 9 to 12, very, very suited to my schedule, I guess. I like morning classes. To go a little bit more in the skills lab, that fall we learned vaccines. So we took the APHA immunization program certification that I think most pharmacists would use. But we learned about vaccines, all the different kind of vaccines, what they what they help prevent, and all the different ways in which they've kind of been used within certain disease states. So the vaccine schedules that CDC puts out, we kind of learned how to interpret those and use those. We learned how to give shots, and by the time I was working at the time, but by the time we were all done and I was certified, it was about December, so we didn't really get a chance. P1s didn't get really a chance to immunize with the flu shot season, but it was still, we got to still carry on through January and a little bit, so maybe it was for the best, I don't know. So moving on to the spring semester of my P1 year, we did medicinal biochemistry 2 and continue learning about all that. I don't really remember specifics about what we did in that semester, but it did help set us up for future things we had to know. We had pharmacology 2, and I enjoyed it, but that was a tougher semester because we learned about all the different kind of hypertensive medications and how their pharmacology worked. So ACEs, ARBs, that was definitely something that you had to know if you were going to be a pharmacist, is how an ACE and an ARB works and how that system works in your body. So the renin-angiotensin system. And then we learned about diuretics and also about the clotting cascade, which I struggled with, the clotting cascade, all the different factors and how all the different anticoagulants help work to either promote or inhibit factors. And anyway, it was a lot, but that was in pharmacology. And then we had our first kinetics course. And so there's the pharmacodynamics and pharmacokinetics kind of areas of medication. So this was focusing on the kinetics, and this was specifically about how different medications go into solutions and also just other dosage forms, right? How do we give these medications? It wasn't so much focused on IV administration, it was more focused on, like I said, solutions and different probably tablets, capsules, pills, gels, whatever. Maybe a little bit of topical I think we might have covered. So kinetics is always a struggle for me. Again, it's math, but also just concepts are very different, but it was our first introduction into that. And then we started with our first pharmacotherapy course. So therapeutics, curing and preventing and treating diseases in relation to pharmacy, specifically pharmacotherapy. And so this was, I think, a little bit of a softer approach to introducing pharmacotherapy. We learned mainly about over-the-counter medications. I was someone who had never had exposure to over-the-counter medications. My family, I guess we never really used over-the-counter medications that much, so going out in that section definitely was confusing and I didn't understand it. So this was really nice to have pharmacotherapy teach me what all was out there, and then we learned details about, as pharmacists, when can we use these with patients and when should we really refer them to more specialized or physician care. So that was a big focus for therapy 1, was when to refer and all the different over-the-counter areas, and we did an assignment too where we went and had to kind of research different patient cases and what over-the-counters we'd use for them, and then we had to go find them in the pharmacy. So that was pretty useful. And then in therapy 1, we just kind of covered what the pharmacist's role is within the healthcare field and how pharmacists, use their skills and knowledge in order to help patients, kind of the process that we go through. I think it's called the pharmacist patient care process. So there's steps within that, and then we have to kind of remember that and use that within our future. More as I get into other videos, I'll talk about how therapy kind of evolved to be more difficult and more involved. So that was therapy 1. It was really nice to get that intro. And then we had a class specifically on healthcare systems. We learned about the US healthcare system, other countries' healthcare systems, and just kind of how we use insurance, Medicare, Medicaid, different programs within the government, but also private insurance. We also learned about how health information is kind of stored within, hospitals or even just physician's office, and how that's used for research. So it's kind of a basis of healthcare, just in general, what the healthcare field kind of does with their data and just kind of how we handle payments. It was a more tough course to kind of understand. I had no exposure to it, and I never really thought about our own healthcare system. So of course our healthcare system is complex, so the class would be complex a little bit at least, but it was really nice to have that class. Then we had our second skills lab, and we just kind of more focused on basics of pharmacy. So like I mentioned, I had worked in a pharmacy, but the pharmacy school kind of has to cover everyone. So people who haven't worked in a pharmacy, what do pharmacists do within like the community setting? How do they fill prescriptions, check prescriptions, take prescriptions over the phone? how do they have intern work, and how does that, counseling. We could apply those things if we were working at the time. We could apply those things in our jobs. So it was really nice, and I did work for about 10 to 12 hours each week while I was in pharmacy school, up until my third year, which I'll talk about later. But I worked about 10 to 12 hours every week, and then I worked about every fourth weekend, and I worked about 20 hours for a weekend. So it was nice, especially in therapy. One, when we learned over-the-counters during those cough and cold seasons, and during kind of just general allergy season when that came up in the spring, I was able to kind of learn that and then just use it right away. So that was really nice. That's why work is really handy sometimes, but I'll talk about that probably in another video. But during the spring, I took 17 credit hours total. You had the option of taking electives, but I decided not to. And the reason for doing that, and I'm not saying everyone has to do this, but I felt like I couldn't take electives, which I didn't really know what I was talking about. So a lot of the electives I've taken now, I've had kind of the first year, like all those classes I mentioned, help build a foundation of knowledge with which I could understand things covered in electives that would focus on specific areas. So as I'll talk in my next video in my P2 year, I was able to take 2 electives that, had I not, waited past first year to take them, I probably wouldn't have understood about a good quarter to a half of the information presented. And I can memorize it. You can try to do your best, but it's good if you really understand it and can retain it for the future. So I didn't take any electives my P1 year. And I also it was a faster pace than I was used to in undergrad, but it was still really, really good. A couple of my favorite things about P1 year is that I was in a school with all pharmacy people, and they were all interested in the same subject I was interested in. So you could literally talk to anyone and just ask them about a class. Hey, have you taken this class? How have you heard about this teacher? What do you think about this? And they would either know or be looking for advice or give you advice. So that was just really cool. I loved that experience about P1 year, getting used to that environment. And then I also just loved how all of my classes were geared toward pharmacy. There was not a class that I really felt I wouldn't use in the future as a pharmacist. So it's really nice to feel like your time is well spent. So that was just another perk of just being in pharmacy school, but I really felt it the most when I was in my P1 year. And then just to talk a little bit briefly, I joined 3 organizations and took on 2 leadership positions. So I will talk about that in other videos about organizations and leadership positions, because I found it really valuable, and I'm glad I did jump in that early with P1 year. It was in December when I got those 2 positions, and around fall area where I joined the 3 different organizations. So really helped me out a lot, but more on that later. But yeah, so P1 year was not my hardest year. It was a change for sure, and it was something I had to work really hard at. I put a lot of energy into it, but I still don't think it was the hardest. And some pharmacy schools and curriculums will have classes that make your P1 year your hardest year. So kind of like I laid out, my courses weren't necessarily kind of the hardest courses I had to take all year, so that's why P1 year was easier. But you'll hear people even in my pharmacy school say P1 year was the hardest just because of adjusting, and maybe they're right. I guess I just was ready for the adjustment. I was ready for it to be all pharmacy all the time, so I found it to be a really good year. So hopefully that helps you guys who are listening, and I will see you in the next video. Thanks.